أهلا ومرحبا بكم. Welcome to lesson number 15, the penultimate lesson in unit number 1. Today we learn the last two modifiers in the Arabic language. First, الشدة. We draw a shaddah on top of a letter and it looks like a small W written from right to left, obviously, like so. So that's a shaddah, and it goes again on top of a letter. Let's take an example. Let's combine these letters. First, a qaf with a dhamma, connecting letter, ba with a sukoon, a connecting letter, ba with a fatha, a connecting letter, ayn with a fatha, a connecting letter, and finally ta marbuta. Okay, how would we pronounce it? Qaf with a dhamma is qu, then ba with a sukoon is b, and then another ba with a fatha is ba, and then ayn with a fatha is a, and then a ta marbuta would sound like an H without a vowel, so ha. So that would be qubba'a. Qubba'a. Notice how there are two B's. Qubba'a. It means a hat. Qubba'a. Now we definitely pronounced it right, but we need to make some adjustment to our writing. Now notice a ba followed by another ba. Now when a letter is repeated in Arabic, and the first letter has a sukoon on top of it, we simply take both letters and replace them by a single letter topped by a shaddah. So that what shaddah says is actually there are two ba's, not one. Now, the vowel on the second ba, it was a fatha. We can't ignore that, so we need to keep the fatha and put it on top of the shaddah. So that would read qubba'a. So what the shaddah is telling us, there are actually two of the letter that it tops. In this case, a ba. So there are two ba's, and the fatha on top of the shaddah tells us that the second ba has a fatha. Obviously the first ba has to have a sukoon, else we can't make it into a shaddah. Let's look at another example. Okay, let's connect them. A mim with a dhamma is mu, then a ayn with a fatha, lam with a sukoon, a lam with a kasra, and then a mim. Let's pronounce it. Mim with a dhamma is mu, ayn with a fatha is a, lam with a sukoon is l, and then a lam with a kasra is li, and then a mim, m. That would make muallim, muallim, which means teacher. Again, notice two lams in a row, the first of which having a sukoon. So we can replace the two lams with a single lam topped by a shaddah. Remember, the second lam has a kasra. Now a kasra needs to be added. Instead of putting the kasra underneath the letter, we put it underneath the shaddah, like so. So now that would read muallim, muallim. Another example. Let's connect it. Ra with a fatha, sin with a sukoon, sin, followed by a long vowel alif, and then a mim. Pronounce it. Ra with a fatha is ra. Sin with a sukoon is s, and then sin with a long vowel is sa, and then a mim, That makes rassam, rassam, which means an artist. Rassam. See the two scenes, the first of which having a sukoon. So we eliminate them and replace them by a single scene topped by a shaddah. In this case, the second letter is modified by a long vowel, alif, which is already there. We didn't eliminate it. So we don't need to add anything to the shaddah. The vowel for the second letter is there already. So that would read rassam, rassam. Remember that we have 6 vowels in the Arabic language. The shaddah can go with any of the 6 vowels. Let's try first the 3 short vowels. Consider this word. It would read murabba, murabba. Notice that the second ba has a fatha, so it went on top of the shaddah, and you have murabba, murabba, which means square. Murabba. Second example. Kulluna, kulluna. Notice the second lam has a dhamma, so the dhamma has to go on top of the shaddah. So that would make kulluna, which means all of us. Kulluna. Next, you have the word طيب, طيب. Notice that the second ya has a kasra. So the kasra went below the shadda. So we got طيب, which means kind. طيب. طيب. I draw your attention to the fact that the first repeated letter always has a sukoon, because if it didn't, we wouldn't have used the shadda. Again, مربع, كلنا, طيب. Now let's try the long vowels. Combining these letters would give us طباخ, طباخ, which means a cook. طباخ. Notice that the second ba is modified by a long vowel alif, and therefore we don't add anything to the shadda. طباخ. Okay, this word would add up to be دبور, دبور, which means a hornet. دبور. The ba here, the second ba, is modified by the long waw, so we don't need to add anything to the shadda. دبور. And finally, this would be بطيخ, بطيخ, which means cantaloupe melon. بطيخ. Notice the second ta is modified by the ya, which is a long vowel here, which makes it بطيخ. So again, the shadda stands alone, we don't need to add anything to it. Again, notice that the first repeated letter always has a sukoon. The ba in طباخ, the ba in دبور, and the ta in بطيخ. Now let's look at examples where we have repeated letters, the first of which doesn't have a sukoon. So consider this. That would be durar, durar, which means pearls. We kept the two ra's and didn't use the shadda because the first ra' didn't have a sukoon. Another example. ممنوع, ممنوع. We kept the two memes because the first meme had a fatha. It didn't have a sukoon. It means prohibited. ممنوع, ممنوع. And finally, قصص, قصص, قصص. We kept the two sads because the first sad has a fatha and not a sukoon. قصص means stories. قصص, قصص. So previously we had learned two words that actually had a shadda and I never told you about. The first word is which means mother. The shadda represent two memes, the first of which has to have a sukoon. The second in this case, because it's in the end of the word, also is going to take a sukoon. So that makes it impossible to pronounce. So we can simply ignore the existence of the meme. So we just say Now, after putting it in a sentence, say we added a tanween بالضم, like so, then the shadda comes back into play, and we have to pronounce it as such. أم, أم, أم. The first meme would have a sukoon, and the second meme would have a tanween. So we say أم, أم. Second word is حظ, which means luck. Again, we ignore the existence of the shadda and say حظ, حظ. But when we put it in a sentence and say we add a tanween, we say حظ, حظ. Our final modifier, al-maddah. Maddah is written on top of an alif and only an alif. And it looks like a sign function written from left to right like so. So this is maddah. Now let's see how we use it. Consider this word. Let's write it up. A qaf with a dhamma is qu. Ra with a sukoon. Alif followed by a long alif as a vowel, like so. And then noon. Let's read it. A qaf with a dhamma is qu. Ra with a sukoon is r. Alif with a long alif as a vowel makes a. And then finally noon, n, which makes Qur'an. Qur'an. Obviously the Quran. The pronunciation is perfect, but we didn't write it correctly. In the Arabic language, you can never have two alifs in a row. So in order to avoid that, we eliminate them and substitute with a single alif topped by a maddah, like so. So the alif and the maddah represent an alif with a hamza followed by an alif which is a long vowel. So a maddah represents a consonant and a vowel at the same time. Qur'an, Qur'an. Let's look at a few examples. Following the same rules, these letters would combine as adhan, adhan, adhan. Adhan is a plural word meaning ears. Adhan. Next word, try to combine it yourself, would make up ظمآن, ظمآن, which means thirsty. ظمآن. And finally, this combination would make شطآن, which means beaches, also a plural. شطآن. To summarize what we learned today, first, the Shaddah, which represents the same letter being repeated twice in a row, the first of which has to have a sukoon. But if the first of the two letters doesn't have a sukoon, we don't use a Shaddah, we keep the two letters. Then we learned Maddah, which represents a hamza followed by a long vowel alif. That's the end of the lesson. See you in lesson number 16. Oh, and if you like the music, it's a song called Al-Ward Jamil by Kulthum, composed by Zakaria Ahmed. See you soon.